Welcome to the Brawling Pit. We talk about all things casual and kitchen table magic like Brawl and EDH. You're listening to episode 47. I'm Johnathan Tang, and he is Jacob.
Ahoy.
Ahoy! Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year, man.
It's Chinese New Year, by the way, guys.
Yeah. Just in
Yeah,
case
that's a
that wasn't
thing.
immediately apparent to anybody, which I would understand that it's not, but, you know.
Yeah, we are in the year of the boar.
Would you just
Or,
call my mother? Did you just call my mother a boar?
No, I would use the word pig.
Wow. Goodbye.
How are you doing?
Jacob has left the podcast. You're doing this solo. Okay, but seriously, I'm not bad, man. You know, life's been pretty busy for me, but I mean, overall, I still have time for magic and all that good stuff, so it's okay overall. How about you? How's life with you?
Life is fine. Just came back from playing with my friends from a playgroup, so it was always good.
Did you win?
I won with my combo deck, and I didn't win with anything else.
Well, what's the combo?
The commander is the mono black Sidisi.
Wow.
You play him, and then you exploit out Ad Nauseam. Use Ad Nauseam to draw out your entire deck, including Sickening Dreams and Glacial Chasm. You play Glacial Chasm, and then you cast Sickening Dreams, discarding your entire hand. Deals like 80-something damage to the whole table.
You're a terrible
That's the
person,
combo.
I hope you know that.
Why?
Why would you put your playgroups to do something like that? You know, if I were your playgroup, I would kick you out. That's a horrible, horrible, mean thing to do to someone else. You know that?
Well, it's literally fast, and I only did it once.
100% win rate with it tonight.
No, I lost it once. I lost once. Actually, I lost once with it, and then I did it once. There was one game where I tutored up Ad Nauseam instead of tutoring up Glacial Chasm, and that basically lost me the game because there was a fast deck on the table.
I see. That's interesting. So, what's new? What are we doing?
We are talking about sideboarding today. What is sideboarding, Jacob?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know because Wizards is transitioning to a best of one format. So, you know, I can't say.
Right now the best of one meme is only applying to the Mythic Championship, right?
Yeah.
So
I guess in the meantime, sideboarding still is kind of a thing. And, you know, there are tons and tons of resources and opinions on how to sideboard, you know, how to build a sideboard, you know. It's... I wanted to go as long as I could without making this joke, but sideboarding is a lot like political opinions. Everybody's got one.
yeah, but sideboard. There's a sideboard in most formats. Not all of them, but most of the Magic formats has a sideboard as long as
It's not a Mythic
it's not
Championship.
as long as it's not a best of one game.
It's not too soon.
Yeah. As long as it's not best of one game, sideboard will come into play and it will matter. In standard, modern, and legacy vintage, you can have a sideboard of up to 15 cards.
Hey, don't forget
These
Pauper.
are cards and Pauper. These are cards that are not part of your 60 card deck, and you can swap cards out in between games.
Yeah, so basically how it works is you have a 10 card deck on the side and you put it into a separate pile right next to it. And then when you play cards from your main deck, let's say Fusions. Oh, wrong game.
Wrong game.
Crap, I was thinking of Yu-Gi-Oh! My bad.
No. In limited, your entire card pool that you didn't put into your main deck will be your sideboard.
Including
So,
land.
for example,
Basic land.
including basic lands. The entire land station in your LGS is your sideboard.
Yeah,
So
dude,
you
I don't
can
get
actually
it. Like my LGS owner, like I'll bring the entire land station over with me when I'm playing, and my LGS owner, who is one of my good friends, he'll get really mad at me. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, this
That's
is
my
side-
sideboard,
yeah,
dude.
My sideboard. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. A drafted Battle of Wits, I gotta go for it.
Yeah, and so he's like, these are not your cards, and I get really mad, but it's not worth making a fuss over. You know, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I know some game store owners started charging money for using
Ooh.
their lands on draft night.
Ooh,
I don't know about
I
that.
think I don't like that. That super rubs me the wrong way. I just feel so money hungry.
Yeah, but yes, in limited, all the cards that you didn't use is part of your sideboard. So you can swap on whatever card you want in between games. That's fine. But there is also a sideboard for Commander. And instead of 15 cards, you have 10. And yes, you can swap things out between games, but most of us don't use that for that purpose, and we'll talk about it.
So, the purpose of sideboarding is, for most people, this is actually a very clear-cut answer. But here at the Brawling Pit, we like to give deep, thoughtful, but meaningful answers. We don't want to just say one answer, like the type of one-size-fits-all kind of advice. Because, I mean, while that's great for a lot of circumstances, there are still a ton of corner cases. I mean, yes, there are corner cases. They're called corner cases for a reason, but there are a lot of them. And so I always hate when things aren't detailed enough or in-depth enough when they don't cover those important cases. They're so important. And so that's why I think, first of all, we should say that the purpose of the sideboard, in a general sense, is probably going to be to increase your win rate. I think that can be universally agreed upon. What do you think?
I think so too. Like, you definitely want to increase your win rate whenever you play. And sideboarding is one of your tools that you can use to win more.
Exactly. But to go deeper into that, you know, how you carry out that strategy, I think, will vary from deck to deck. You know, so a lot of the times you'll see in Standard, right? Most of the time, what you do with your sideboard is you take your weaker cards and you put them in for better cards. And usually, but not always, your better cards are stronger, but only in certain situations. They're more niche. So an example of this card, or an example of this would be a green 2-mana removal spell, destroy target creature with flying. That's usually a sideboard card, because what if your opponent doesn't have any flying creatures? Or what if they don't have any meaningful flying creatures that you don't really care about? Well, if you have that in your main board, and you're playing against a wide field with various types of decks, then, you know, most of the time, that card is going to be quite bad. But only against some decks is that card really good. So you leave it in your sideboard, because that means that, okay, it's plan B if I run into, you know, a deck with a bunch of flying creatures that I want to kill. But most of the time, you don't want it. That's the general usage of sideboarding I would actually say, for most formats, especially for Standard. But sometimes you don't do that.
Yeah, there are many use cases.
One example is a transformative sideboard.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you could semantically argue that, oh, I'm taking out my technically weaker cards to put in my technically stronger cards. But, like, I want to avoid a semantic argument between quote-unquote weaker and stronger. Even though most of the time they'll be agreed upon, I still would like to avoid those terms if possible. So, with like a transformative sideboard, that usually indicates that you are literally transforming your strategy of your deck to a significant degree. So, what would be an example of a transformative sideboard?
A transformative sideboard usually is when you have a really good combo in your main board. A combo is so good that your opponent has to board in things to stop it. So what you do in response, you're 200 IQing them because you're taking out the combo that they're boarding for, and you're putting in either other combos or you're putting in actual good creatures that are completely irrelevant to whatever they boarded in. That would be an example of a transformative sideboard.
And, as we talked about in a prior Evergreen episode, with card advantage and virtual card advantage, if you board out your combo and they board in things to deny you of your combo, all those things that they just boarded in are dead cards because you're not playing your combo anymore. That would be an example, a very good example of a transformative sideboard. A less extreme example, but I would still classify this as a transformative, is about the time that I played a deck called Medium Red. Now, once again, this is completely arbitrary, and I'm pretty sure I've told this story before, but I played a Medium Red deck, which was just a mono red deck that played, I think, 23 lands, but it was like a winnie deck, basically. And, it curved up to 3 in the main board. But after board, it brought in a couple temples, just the Scrylands. And
oh my gosh.
yeah, and it went up to Sarkon, the 5-mana planeswalker.
Oh,
yep. And so what came out were the weenies, and it literally just became like a mono red mid range deck.
Yeah, so you transform from aggro to mid range.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there was still, don't get me wrong, there was still like 2 drops and 3 drops. Like, there were still very aggressive elements, but like, the weenies came out.
Yeah. Another example is so there's been a pretty French modern deck. It's been popular a while ago, but I think now it's like back to the French status.
Yep.
It's Scape Shift.
Oh yeah.
Brain to Light Scape Shift to be specific. Basically, what you do is you cast Brain to Light into Scape Shift, sack all your lands and bring up Falcon and a bunch of mountains, and then your opponent's dead. Alright. It is a combo deck. It runs pretty much 0 creatures.
It's hard to interact with too, because like the way you win is literally just like, okay, cast Scape Shift and have a bunch of lands. It's not tied to like a creature or anything.
Yeah, so it's super hard to deal with, which means, a sideboard is required. So some decks, some players actually, they're gonna bring out cards from their sideboard to counter my Bring to Light or counter my Scape Shift. Well, I'm gonna 200 IQ them. I'm gonna board in like 12 creatures. Board out Bring to Light, board out Scape Shift, and then you board in a bunch of creatures.
I've seen that before, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much blanking out every single sideboard card that your opponent bring in.
And it's tough for your opponent. Well, it's also tough for you, but it's tough for your opponent because they don't know if you're bringing in like the creatures. And
yeah,
you know, there's a discussion that we will be having very shortly about literally how to sideboard as well. It's actually a bit more complicated if you're like trying really hard. So, on the topic of 200 IQing your opponent, you know, there's always the question, and this question has been asked before. I believe it was asked by our predecessors who are still here. Limited resources. Or maybe it was construction. It was one of those Marshall Sutcliffe things. Anyways, he asked the question to a pro that he had as a co-host. Well, how many levels deep do you go? And the pro's answer was usually 1. So there's the upside of going deeper, right? So like, let's take this Scape Shift versus, you know, whatever deck we're playing against, right? So level 0 would be no sideboarding, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then level 1 would be, okay, he's going to be taking out removal. So I'm going to be...
because you're playing Bogles.
Yeah. And then level 2 would be like going back and forth. Like, again, if you're going... So it's like, but wait, if he thinks that I think, that he thinks, and how far down you go, you know, it is completely arbitrary. But I think it's genuinely agreed upon that like 1 level, maybe 2 max, is probably the right way to go. Generally sticking to 1, like almost always generally sticking to 1. I think I've only ever successfully like 200 IQ like level 2 meta someone like just once ever in my life.
Yeah,
I honestly would say don't even bother trying. Like unless you're really confident.
You don't play a lot of decks that will be very successful with the transformative sideboard.
Right.
Like Bogles would be good because like you game 2 you board in your core spirit dancers because they're gonna board out all their removals.
And slightly off topic,
for
that's
example.
like the draw to playing a brew, right? So in
Yeah.
a very optimized metagame, like if an opponent knows the deck you're playing, which they generally do if you're playing a tier deck, then they know how you're going to sideboard generally, and they know what strategy you're going to be trying to enact. And so it's very easy to strategize against you. Now, I'm not saying that your deck is bad, or I'm not saying that the strategy you're using is bad. I'm just saying it's predictable, and that doesn't mean that they can necessarily stop it either. But it's just you're very predictable. But that's the draw to a brewer is you're using an unknown strategy, and they have no idea what to do, and they're literally in the dark guessing. That would be the optimal brewer situation. That like having the road deck. That's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works out. Sometimes that advantage works enough in your favor that, you know, your deck is better than a tier deck. But sometimes it doesn't. It's hard to give a definitive answer if, like, brewing is always better than playing a tier deck. Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not.
Right.
And so on the topic of 200 IQing, how many meta levels deep, and literally how to sideboard, I'd like to ask you, Johnathan, let's say you're playing standard, okay?
Yeah.
You want to take out 5 cards, and you want to bring in 5 cards. How do you do it? Like, literally walk me through your process of how you do this.
Well, did I already build my sideboard?
Yes, you already have a sideboard. Yeah, you're going into game 2, and you want to bring out 5 cards from your main board and put in 5 from your sideboard. How do you do it?
Well, so if you are holding a gun against my head and you want me to sideboard 5 cards, then I'm going to, well, take 5 cards off my main deck, put on the side, pull 5 cards from my sideboard, and put into my main deck, and I'll shuffle up and play.
And you know, for most cases, that's fine. But if you have like a strategy you're trying to hide, or you're really trying to min-max, the actual optimal way to sideboard is to shuffle your entire sideboard in, and then go pick out the 15 cards that you don't want. That way your opponent is actually guessing at how many cards you brought in, and how many you're not bringing in.
Oh my god.
Like, and very, very rarely do I use this strategy. Actually, sometimes it's better that you don't. So, for example, if you really are playing the mental game, the psychological warfare game, which sometimes you do, most of the times you don't, but sometimes you do. It's not something that you should completely rule out. Showing how many cards you're going to sideboard in sometimes is really helpful. I'm not kidding. I think I've won a couple day 2 GP matches off of this. I'm not kidding. So, one time, I was playing, I think, it was Mono Blue versus Control back in the day. And it was not a good matchup for Mono Blue. But I remember I boarded in like literally 12 cards. 12 out of 15 cards came in for Control. My opponent was shook from that. I'm not kidding. I won that game in 3 games because I lost game 1. That's just what happened with that deck. But afterwards, he's like, "Wow, when I saw you run in 12 sideboard cards," he was actually a little scared, you know? 'Cause like,
yeah,
most decks don't bring in. Most of the time, you just never bring in 12 cards.
Yeah.
But it's
So
like
the control player will be like, oh my gosh, you have 12 cards prepared for me.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of pressure.
Yeah. And so he told me about like how he blundered. Like there's a card called Judge's Familiar. It's a 1-mana 1/1 flyer bird, but it has the ability sacrifice it, counter target non-creature's spell unless his controller pays 1 generic. But he was so shook from how many cards I was bringing in from that psychological shock that he said that he forgot about that card's ability, and so he cast a spell when he shouldn't have, and I counted it and won the game off of it.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's a really niche example, and I want to emphasize that most of the time, the psychological warfare kind of stuff like usually doesn't matter. I mean, technically it always matters, but usually you're not in a position to capitalize on it, you know?
Yeah.
But like, when you are in those situations, it's always cool to be able to like, oh dude, I can't believe I won off of that. It's very rare. It's only happened a few times to me in my life. So,
Wow.
sometimes it's harder to do against like established players. They're kind of tilt proof and they don't get scared easily. But if you're like against, you know, newer players or less experienced players, like you're an F&M, then sometimes showing how many sideboard cards that you're bringing in can actually help a lot. If you're going for that kind of thing. But if you're going for like a transformative sideboard and you want to hide your strategy and you want your opponent to not know, then, you know, shuffling all 15 and taking out 15 is a thing. I have done that more than the aforementioned psychological warfare trick that I just mentioned. I've done that quite a few times, actually.
It feels like you watch Rick and Morty.
Do I?
I know you don't.
Yeah, I don't.
But it feels like you do because it's such a high IQ play.
Oh, okay. I couldn't tell if I was being memed or not. I couldn't tell if that was a giant Papega. Oh, man. That's a thing from Rick and Morty, right?
Yeah.
No, okay, guys. I don't want to bring in Rick and Morty. I don't watch it. I'm sorry, guys. It's not that the show is bad, but there were just a few too many run-ins with degenerate fans. I just can't risk associating myself with them.
One of them is me.
Oh,
so
yeah. Sorry, guys. No, I've seen some clips. I actually have. You showed me some clips of that show. And I think it is so hilarious. It's like the funniest cartoon I've seen in so long.
It's pretty good.
So no shade at Rick and Morty. Absolutely none. I'm throwing shade at the fans.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's instead of Rick and Morty, let's talk about how to actually build a sideboard.
So this one is definitely going to depend on what you're trying to do. So let's assume that you're trying to just build a regular sideboard where you take out your weak cards and you put in strong cards. That's the easiest, you know, most common method, right? Because building a transformative sideboard is a lot like more complicated of a process. I think we can agree upon that, huh?
Yeah. It is a complicated process.
Yeah. So
a lot of times, I think a lot of times transformative sideboard is a thing where people see people do and then they just kind of copy it. Like one of the more popular builds, for example, when it was legal, is you see a lot of, for example, Storm to Twin was a thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was also Living End to Living Spin to Twin, which is a thing. And a lot of people do that kind of thing, but they do it because they're like, oh, other people are doing it and they're getting great success, which is a fine thing, right? Like that's what the internet is for.
Yep.
It's an information archive and you can go do the thing. But that kind of sideboard is a lot harder when you have to come up with it on your own.
Oh, it's
yeah.
And you know that actually brings us to the first aspect of building your sideboard. There are two different ways that you can build a sideboard. You can completely build it from scratch, or you can find an example and tune it. Just for simplicity's sake, let's go with the second one. Because the first one, we could probably talk at length for many, many moons, and we'll still not cover everything.
Yeah.
So, let's assume that you're going to get an example. So, first of all, where should you get your example? Where do you get your examples?
There are a lot of good resources. MTG Goldfish is a good resource. There's also Channel Fireball, like anywhere with deck text on it. Usually you have the sideboard that comes with the deck.
And honestly, my recommendation is find a good deck tech. Even if you know the deck very intimately, the main board, but you're trying to figure out your sideboard, find a deck tech and read why that author chose the sideboard cards that they did. Because maybe they thought of something that you didn't.
Yeah.
So, let's say though that you got this brew and there's no deck tech on it. Well, that's a bit harder. You know, you gotta... That one requires you, and this is also the same if you're building your own sideboard, you have to know what your deck's weaknesses are. You must.
You must. And that comes from a lot of playtesting. Or just general intuition, but mostly playtesting.
Yep, but I always playtest. Even if you have a deck on paper and you're like, this is great, I've made many decks in my lifetime. Many decks. And almost every single time, the deck plays out some degree differently than how I anticipated it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's almost perfectly how I envisioned it. Most of the time, it's like, it's a little different, but not too far off the mark. And then sometimes it's like, what have I done?
Yeah. What have you done?
It's like, oh, this doesn't work the way I wanted it to. But it's that really matters though, because you'll really be able to identify your key weaknesses for your deck, and your sideboard should shore up those weaknesses, because ideally your deck should win, in a vacuum more than 50% of the time. Ideally.
Well, a good deck would win more than 50% of the time. If two random decks are pitched against each other over and over again, that's the baseline. You want to have at least 50%. Otherwise, why?
Yep. And I know that I just said that we don't like to be shallow. We have to be shallow for this following piece of advice for building a sideboard. You have to decide, am I going to shore up my weakest matchups, or am I going to make stronger my stronger matchups, or somewhere in between? So an example of this is like, let's say that mono blue deck that I was talking about. There was a conscious choice to have 12 cards for the control matchup. Or I can completely abandon control and dedicate those slots towards another matchup. And you have to decide what's better. And math will help you. I'm serious, guys. Once I started doing math on my decks, it's like my win percent actually increased, I think 5% in competitive Magic. If you want like a good example of how to do math, I would just look at some of MTG Goldfish's formulas. They have them somewhere on their website. We'll probably put it in the info. But basically how the math works is you assign a win rate for each deck. Like, and this is, once again, this is completely arbitrary. But you assign you list out the top 10 decks or 15 or however deep you want to go. I say no less than 10, honestly, for if I'm prepping for like a competitive event. And I say, well, here's my win rate against each deck that I expect to see. And then you give it a weighting. And the weighting is how often you'll see this deck. And then you can use those numbers to say, well, I only have like a 20% win rate against this deck, but it never shows up. So you just don't prep for it, right? Because it almost never shows up. On the other hand, you might have like a 40% win rate against a deck that, shows up 80% of the time. Well, first of all, I would probably just not play the deck if that were the case. But if you must play the deck, then you have an idea of, well, is it better to improve this matchup? And you make a new win rate based on your sideboard versus improving your other ones.
You probably shouldn't be playing the bad deck when everyone is playing Eldrazi.
Right. But if you have to, then or most of the time your cases will lie in between those two extremes. But you can use that math to help you make a better decision.
Right.
Because while my intuition is pretty good about Magic, I've been around the block a few times, it's not perfect. And by doing the math, it helps me shape up those times where I'm off the mark.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're like, 80% of the time Eldrazi shows up in Modern. Maybe I should board Gut Shot against Eldrazi Sky Spawner?
Casual reminder that I pioneered Gut Shot this before the Pro Tour. Before that Pro Tour, I pioneered Gut Shot.
Yeah.
Yep. I did it. Because it was actually a regional. It was an SCG regional. And
yeah, you have deck lists online.
Yeah. And I'm not gonna say which deck list it is, because I don't want to dox myself, but basically I had 4 Gut Shots in my sideboard for a regional. And these regionals happened the day before the Pro Tour. So the deck list worked out. I knew it. I knew it was coming.
The Eldrazi.
I had a good matchup against it. Boy. But it didn't show up though. I shouldn't have prepped for it because it like nobody had it. I mean, I still top 8'd, but I'm proud of myself. I top 8'd that regional. Feels good.
Yeah. Before we close out on the art of constructed sideboarding, there's one thing that a lot of older formats do is they'll sideboard off color cards.
I love that. So good.
Yeah. So one thing that you can actually do is if you're already running shocks and checks, for example, you can board one off color shock land. And
You can have
a
one
bunch of fetch
off-color
lands,
land in your main
Yeah.
board.
which you can fetch into.
Yep.
And in your sideboard, you have cards from other colors that help you answer things your colors cannot answer. So Dismember is a very good example. Even though most people use their health, some people will they'll have like a black in there somewhere.
Yeah, and even though you only technically have one color or one source of that color, your fetch lands count too. Yeah, sure, you might only have one shock land that's in blue, but you have 10 fetches that can get that blue. Like, you're fine. You can go get you're gonna be fine.
Yeah, you'll be fine. So, yeah. For limited sideboard, I don't know if there's a lot of arts in it, but one thing you can do, just build 2 decks.
Oh man.
I think that's the most extreme thing you can do.
Limited sideboards are really fun because I almost never use them. Most people don't use them. Yeah.
It's definitely interesting. There was one time, this is an anecdote, so it may not happen to anyone again, but this happened to me. And when I was playing in a GP, it was like a Sunday event, so the loser event. We after everyone loses main event, you play that one.
The not day twos, yeah.
Yeah, that one. And I have a really good bomb in this limited event, and I played that bomb and basically won the game because that's how good that card is. And then after game 1, my opponent was like, "Man, I gotta board in some cards just against that card." And I heard that. I didn't say anything. And I took that card out of my deck and put in some other cards from my sideboard.
Ooh.
So that is something that you can do. Is like if your opponent is going to be like,
Yep.
you have a card that's so good that he's going to board in 4 cards to answer it.
That's the level
Just
2
take that card out.
metagaming right there. Level 2 right there, guys. You just level 2
you
that
take your
guy.
card out. So, exactly. So, limited sideboard, I think that probably deserves this whole other episode.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We
so-
have, lastly, the wishboard in Commander.
Oh yeah.
Now,
Don't forget, guys. Commander gets a sideboard.
yeah, people usually don't actually sideboard between games. But sideboard has a very, very good use case in Commander. There are a lot of wish cards, which means you can tutor, basically.
Which
you can
means
get
you
a
get to
card
tutor.
from... Yeah, you can wish a card from outside the game, which is your sideboard, put it into your hand, and then you can cast that card.
I just made a wish pun, and you totally didn't acknowledge it at all. I feel so bad.
Yeah, I was cringing too hard,
Oh,
but
that's
Yeah,
gonna
you
be a
can-
mega
you can-
cringe for me.
yeah, that's something that you can do. And we on the Brawling Pit ourselves, we have actually done something with a deck that so far, my record with it is 100% win rate.
Is it the Eldrazi deck?
It is the group hug deck.
Oh.
It is the group hug deck.
Whatever. It's the
uses-
Eldrazi deck. Whatever. Same
Uh,
thing.
The Ulamog Spawnsire will utilize the wishboard to tutor in 10 Eldrazi cards and basically win the game the moment it hits the table. Because, that's just how good the sideboard is. Especially like those cards you don't want to ever draw into because they're so expensive. You're never going to use it. You're never going to hard cast them, right?
Yeah.
Well, when you're wishing them in, perfect. You will never draw into them, and
They'll never be getting in your hand.
and they are only there when you are going off, and which is the most powerful.
Just for reference, if you want that group hug deck, the Eldrazi one that we were just talking about, episode 35.
It's not an Eldrazi deck; it's a group hug deck. 100% win rate group hug deck.
It's really good. I got to play a deck similar to it. I say similar, but in reality, it was just a dumb Eldrazi deck.
Yeah, check it out, guys. It's pretty good. Pretty busted.
Your face is busted.
What do you think about sideboarding? Do you think it's the right call for Wizards to move to a best of one format in high-level tournaments that has $1 million on the line?
Yeah, it is.
What do you think?
It is.
Do you think it's worth having watchability over actual skill testing sideboarding things in your games, or what do you think? Let us know what you think. Let us know how you sideboard. I want to know how you sideboard, what your tips and strategies are, and I'm absolutely interested. So you can let us know on our social media at Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at Brawling Pit. You can find us on Reddit at r/Brawling Pit. Email us at brawlingpitmtg@gmail.com, or you can visit our official website, brawlingpit.com. As always, I've been Johnathan, and he has been Jacob. Thanks for listening.
So Wizards actually just pushed out an official article talking about their 2018 products and how they did.
Gavin Frey.
Basically, one thing that surprised me was, Ultimate Masters, according to this article, did quite well.
I mean, it depends on what you think well.
Well, I mean,
means,
they
right?
didn't really give numbers, but basically what he said was Masters 25 was like a dumpster fire, and Ultimate Masters did pretty well. And even though there was a higher price point, stores were still selling out and asking for more. That's all it says.
Yeah. Like, it's hard for Ultimate Masters to not do well because of the power level. Yeah, that's why I thought. Like, Masters 25 was a dumpster fire, and
No
so
true
that's what I said.
guarantee,
Like,
baby.
it depends on how you define successes.
It was better than the dumpster fires, but I guess that's a pretty low bar.
Yeah, it's a really low bar.
I don't know. I think it did fine for a supplementary set, though.
It was okay. I think my absolute favorite products that they released in 2018 was not the Commander 2018 set. It was actually the Game Night box.
Really?
I get to play my the Game Night box with my buddies in my playgroup, and it's a lot of fun. They're built to be super balanced, and you don't get the thing where you're playing $1,000 deck and I'm playing a $20 deck, that kind of thing, because they all come from the same box and they're all built to play well against each other. So it's just me.
You know what else did well that I'm really happy about?
What else?
The Spellslinger starter kit decks. The ones that have like the instructions like don't shuffle, and it's like kind of like a tutorial like in a video game.
The tutorial?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the only product I didn't purchase.
No, and I mean it wasn't targeted for this. Well, I mean, it kind of was if we were like trying to bring in a new friend, but otherwise, like, no, if you're not trying to bring in someone new, it's not for you.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine. And the result that they said on the article said, it was okay. Like, it did fine. This is literally what they said. It did totally fine. It didn't blow the doors off, but the signs seem to be pointing towards it serving a very important role in the ecosystem, which, bringing in new players, which is fine. I think as long as this didn't, like, cost them, like they made some sort of profit from this, I think they should continue producing these.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, like, bringing in new blood is so important for this game.
Yeah, this is the kind of deck that's just like the welcome decks that they push out to the open house events. I mean, it's the same thing. They're literally throwing... These are marketing budget money.
Yep. And the fact that they're not taking a loss on this, like, they're actually profiting from this. And, like, I mean, I believe in the 80-20 rule. I think especially with Magic, like, 80% of your sales come from 20% of your population,
Yeah.
That's just, like, a general thing. I think the reason why these didn't just like, wow, we hit record sales and we're like billionaires with these kind of things is that it didn't target that 20% population, but that's totally fine that it didn't. Like, it's serving its purpose, acquainting new players into the game and improving retention, and they're profiting at least probably somewhat slightly. So
Yeah.
that's perfect. That's great. This is serving its use, and they're not losing
Yeah, it's
money,
perfect.
and they're not, at least they're not bleeding money from it.
Yeah, it's perfect.
And on the topic of the starter decks, we just covered the F&M thing recently, but I think they absolutely have to have something for the starter tournaments too, because I remember the open houses.
Yeah.
I would go to them as a very established player, and I would just get like free booster packs from crushing all these people and knocking them out of the tournament. I mean, they didn't technically get knocked out; they got to keep playing, but like, I mean, I kind of denied them a
Well,
free booster pack, you know.
well, different stores do it differently. So, like for example, my stores, there are no prizes. So the only thing you get for participating is the promo card from open house. So I think your store actually did it wrong for
Oh, you know what?
having
You might be
prize
right
packs.
because I only went to like 2 different stores for it, and both of them did like a tournament thing where like every time you won, you got a free pack. But I guess, yeah, if that might not be the right way to do it, and I'm not gonna like call out those stores. By the way, I'm not about snitching here. But like
Yeah,
I
don't be a
think you might be
snitch.
right. That makes way more sense to do that.
Yeah.
But even so, like when you have players matching against each other, you still don't want your new player to get like absolutely demolished. That's like pretty demoralizing.
It is pretty
So
demoralizing.
I
but
still think they need that matchmaking system for the lower elo players. Yeah. Otherwise, all the other products seem to do okay or good from what I read. But yeah, I'm just glad that the things that we wanted to do well did well.
perfect. So maybe paper magic will not be replaced by MTGA after all.
I don't know. I wouldn't hold my breath, but we'll see. We'll see what the future holds.
We'll see.